Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this Brave Days event. We are here with Jovan Mays for a poetry workshop, and I just want to give you some quick background information on Jovan. First, let me tell you who I am. My name is Erin Gallagher. I'm program manager with This Is My Brave. I'm going to do an intro, and then I'm going to turn it all over to Jovan, and he's going to walk us through our first of several workshops occurring each week with Jovan. So thanks for joining us today, Jovan. Jovan is the inaugural and emeritus Poet Laureate of Aurora, Colorado. Also a National Poetry Slam champion, TED speaker, and the youth voice coordinator of Aurora Public Schools. So he is working with young people. What does that mean, being the youth voice coordinator, Jovan?
Basically the job is to make sure that we're creating a space for youth voice at the table of decisions made within our district, and that we're also putting students on track to be in the spaces that they want to be in their futures. And so our drive is to make sure that students are seen and heard. We have a philosophy called the hearers and the heard, which means the more hearers we create, the more heard we create, thus strengthening the herd of our society. So
Cool.
that's how we operate.
That's not at all what I thought that was going to be, so I'm glad I asked. That's really neat. All right, well, I'm going to leave it to you to take over things, and I'm here with my pen and my rocket book ready to do some jotting. So thanks for leading us in today's workshop.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Erin. And I just want to say happy Mental Health Month to everybody. This is a really cool thing to celebrate. I was doing some reading today that just telling me that this has been around since 1949, which is like insane to me to think that Mental Health Awareness Month or Mental Health Month has been this long. So here we are today. Of course, This Is My Brave is coming through the way that they always come through, with making sure that they're supporting content and programming that is going to, support their community the best way they possibly can. So I personally believe that, in my mental health journey, I've been able to explore that it's writing has been an assistance piece to me. And then as an educator, learning how to support people has been a big thing for myself as well, into their journey of their own creativity. And that's what we're really going to work on over these next 4 weeks together. And so, like I've always done, and like I've always been pressed to do, is let's bless the room with a poem here today. And this poem's called Breakout, and it goes like this. When I was 8 years old, all I could recall was all of my energy bouncing. Teachers were appalled before they'd applaud, never knew one day I'd move mountains. And the schools were riddling into our skin while other kids are always just clowning. I mean, look at this undertaught astronaut. Thought I was an afterthought, but now I'm an aftershock. Picked up this pot and cooked up some food for thought for loose cannons in workshops where their work gets hot, converting killer stanzas to kilowatts and watch the clocks like ticking bombs, because in here there's no second thoughts. Nah, just a train of thought that never stops. Let's travel in the speed of knots. I wanted to figure out where pans hit fountains, while lead cut heads and words were astounding, while some words whispering, some words were shouting. Truth is, I wish some teachers would stop throwing the case out, because some kids really need to just break out. I wish some schools would get hip to the breakdown, because some kids really need to just break out. Truth is, the baddest kid in the background is the baddest kid on the playground who needed to break out. Needed to break out, needed to break out, needed to break out, Joe. I mean, the truth of the matter is all these kids are splattering, not fitting inside of the cage now. I mean, sometimes the tide arises and conspires to compromise all the space now. I mean, sometimes the mind is a steeplechase trying to catch a chase when hoping to stake down. But if the fire mixes with the wind and the sins, who deny when it turns to a blaze now? And the wind turns to a fire, the fire turns to a chorus. The forest might just fall to the banks now. And if that forest becomes uproarious, rising to its glorious, who deny the sky that it takes down? And if that sky is just as vast with overcast and beating fast, where will you be when those clouds start to bleed out? I mean, sometimes they put us in assembly line so many times. The only choice is to just break out. Is it just break out? Is it just break out? Is it just break out? Poem. So that is a spoken word poem, and that is, the anchorage of which we're probably going to celebrate and learn from a lot inside this workshop series together. I am super excited to be here. So First thing I like to do to talk about when I talk about poetry is a few core rules that I kind of like to stick to. And rules is such a harsh word. I mean, really, what I want to talk about here is just some elements to think of, right? So I don't know if anybody here has the fantastic opportunity of spending time with young people, but I get to do that daily. But in particularly in my life, I have my 5-year-old nephew, who is absolutely unequivocally one of my best friends. Here's actually a picture of him. This is Kason, the Wonder Man, riding his uncle. And Kaysen is such a curious mind, and his mind is always asking these interesting questions, that surprises me. And I got to tell you about Kaysen. He is so impressive when I get to spend time with him. We go to the park, and when we go to the park, I'm thinking, he's going to be entertained by only the playground. We get to the playground, the thing that he finds the most entertaining is actually the gravel around the playground, and I don't even see the amazingness of this gravel. And he's pouring it through his hands like it's like he's Yoda, and it's like made of like magic gold, and he's throwing them up in the air and stepping underneath the rocks and feeling them fall against his coat and laughing at the sound. Or he's doing these beautiful little black boy snow angels on the rocks. And I gotta tell you, like, I don't even see some of the things that happens in his brain. And this is one of the biggest core points of us that we got to think about, is that nothing just is. Once we can identify with this poetry point number one, that nothing just is, this actually simply unlocks the whole entire gamut of like what we can unfold inside of a poem. Okay, poetry point number two comes straight from my second grade teacher in elementary school. We're working on our poetry lesson plans, and I'm just a young man trying to figure out how to get into this poetry thing. And I'm doing what all little kids do all the time. Little kids are always just raising their hands. Am I wrong? Like, little kids stay ready with their hands in the air. And I'm saying, what is this poetry thing? I don't get it, Miss Chambers. And Miss Chambers was like, well, Jovan, uh, uh, you got to think about it a little more. I said, Miss Chambers, you know what? I'm really into trees. And I wonder, like, you're saying poetry is like a writing thing, right? And she said, yeah. I said, are you saying poetry comes from a softwood trees? Because paper is where softwood trees come from. So you must be that. And Miss Chambers said, nah, Jovan, no. I said, Miss Chambers, do you think you can bury a pencil? And if you bury a pencil and water it and treat it really well, does it just grow up and make pencil trees? She said, nah, Jovan. She said, Jovan, and the best advice I've gotten in my career thus far, at second grade, third grade, was poetry is your own language. And the power of this given to a young man who is struggling with dyslexia and dysgraphia and trying to figure out the educated lexicon. And like you heard in my poem, struggling with being identified as attention deficit disorder and all these other things. All of a sudden, I got given a language, right? And I think so often when we creatively write, we try to wash our language out of ourselves. Some folks try to get into this like Shakespearean language, or something of that sort. And I really do personally feel like it's really important for you to honor yourself and the worlds that you came from. You might have heard my first poem and said, I'm not sure if that was poetry. That might have been hip hop. Well, I was raised in a household where the hip hop tradition was celebrated, thus, of course, that made its way into my language. Now, all of us are from different places, and inside of those places, we do all sorts of different things, where there's different vernaculars and different terms used. And I want you to make sure that when you write, you honor all those things by getting your own language inside of your work, right? One thing I constantly tell my students, I say, hey, if you don't write your story, somebody else will for you, and they'll do a terrible job. So you make sure that your language is represented, that your folk, your ilk is represented inside of it as well. Poetry point number three. This comes straight from one of my favorite poetry coaches in the world, Jen Rinaldi. And Jen Rinaldi used to always say, your page is not a cage. And what your page is not a cage means to me, this could mean many things to people, right? That writing is an endless adventure, that, don't just like, get to the page and get stressed out, that it never stops. But for me, I like to think about how the poems are actually everywhere. The poems are my nephew. playing with the gravel in the playground. The poems are every sunset that we see, where we're just like, that gives us presence and locks us into a moment. Every sunrise that does the same thing. The poems are that time you find $1 in your pocket when you really needed it, or when you're in the car and your favorite song comes on the radio and you start jamming, or when your song comes on the radio that makes you think of somebody and takes you to a specific place that's not even a place that you're in. The poems are everywhere. And the reality is that we are never going to write all these poems. They say that we have between 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. If we think for 1 second that we can reach into this wild brain and pull out the perfect thought and place it down onto our page every time, we are gravely mistaken. So what I tend to do is just say, word. When I see something outside that just impresses me, just the other day, I got to see a blue jay for the first time. I was like, word, right? I was at the Colorado National Monument with my partner today, and I saw that, these wonderful rock formations out there. I said, word. But give acknowledgement to that, because your page is not a cage, meaning not every poem is going to get written down. So let's just celebrate the poetry that exists all around us. Happy, sad, magic, and tragic. Give those things those types of credit. Poetry point number 4. This comes to me from the Pulitzer Prize winner for poetry from last year, Jericho Brown. He says, it's not about the about, it's about the journey. When I talk about this with young people, I like to try to hit a little beat with it. Like, it's not about the about, it's about the journey. Ooh, it's not about the about, it's about the journey. This is so crucial, y'all. It's not about the about, it's about the journey. It's so crucial because so many times when we write, we try to write with a destination in mind. And I don't know if y'all are with me and y'all are out there as people who dream, but when you dream, your mind can take you on all sorts of rabbit holes. Your brain does not always work that way, where you can just get to set your destination and land where you want to land. So what I always say is you got to enjoy it. One thing to think about, and I know this might be a little bit of a Colorado thing, but more of a river thing, is that whenever you go whitewater rafting, you have a person who's your rafting guide who's giving you advice. The rafting guide gives you 3 S's to consider when you fall out of the boat. The first S is stand. And the rafting guide says, hey, don't stand in this river. If you stand in this river, you run the risk of getting your foot caught underneath the rock. If you get your foot caught underneath the rock, you run the risk of getting underneath the toe. And that's when rafting gets very dangerous. So don't stand in this river. The other one is swim, too. Don't you swim in this river. This river is so strong that it's like a giant treadmill or conveyor belt that you will exhaust yourself and drain your adrenaline and then won't be able to go into a self-rescue mission if you swim against it. If you swim with it, you run the risk of bouncing your face off a rock that you can't see. And guess what? Rocks don't bounce, right? So you got to be really, really careful. Don't swim in that river. So he says, what's one? Well, you're sitting there. What? What's the third one? Sit. We got to learn how to sit in our rivers, okay? And when you raft, it's funny because you have a wetsuit and a life preserver, just like you do in this life, right? You're not going to hurt yourself riding, okay? So put on your life, your life vest and your wetsuit and your booties. Sit in your river, point your feet downstream, and as is emphasized there, prepare for the rocks. And preparing for the rocks simply means use your feet to guide you through as you go, which means that at all these different impasses and all these different turns, something's going to shift you on your journey. You don't get to be in control. There's a reason they say that your mind is like a stream of consciousness, or that, your mind can run or even channel at different times like that. It's because it's related to water in its own weird way. So like I always say, in response to Jericho Brown, it's not about the about, it's about the journey. The very last point I want to share with you comes to us by way of Walt Disney from one of my favorite movies called Saving Mr. Banks. And I don't know if you've ever saw this movie, but it's about the making of Mary Poppins. And who would have known that the background of the making of Mary Poppins had to do with an author who wrote a book that basically was describing her father and his struggles with alcoholism. And while this author is writing this book, she's struggling with the makers of Disney, who are trying to turn this book into like what we know it to be, this cartoon penguin musical type of thing. And she's grappling greatly with the idea that like they're taking the seriousness out the story, they're not justifying it, and this is frustrating me beyond belief, right? And so finally she's like, y'all need to stop, y'all cannot turn my book into a movie, this cannot work. And Walt Disney came in and gave the most beautiful advice to Travers, the author. He said, you know what, this is just what we storytellers do. We storytellers, we restore order with our imagination, and we instill hope again and again and again. And until I saw that movie, I'd never thought about this, that imagination restores order. And this is really important to know, y'all, in this mental health world and the struggles that some of us have, that our imagination can be one of the most apt tools that we have for ourselves to restore an order. And at a time when even in the States, our country seems to be in this space of division, again, we still have our imagination to work and restore this order. So use it wise, use it well, and use it in a way where it's spilling all over the place, to not just destroy the orders that we know, but to also repair and restore them in a way that brings us into a greater view of life and the way we see it. So those are my 5 key points, right? Let's review them just really, really quick as we go through it. We'll review them again. Number 1 is hiding. Number 1 is right here. It's nothing just is. Okay. Number 2, poetry is my own language. Number 3, your page is not a cage. Number 4, it's not about the about, it's about the journey. And number 5, imagination restores order. So let's talk a little bit about what we're kind of trying to achieve inside this writing time that we have here, and that we kind of establish some things. I was sort of thinking when I was propositioned to create this class about what a 4-week session could look like between us. And the first thing that came to me is I thought about this thing that my therapist gave me that was called the cognitive dissonance model. And this was the idea that like we have really challenging thoughts as human beings. And it's really hard to make sure that our thoughts, when we are properly filtering them, can graduate to helpful, truthful thoughts. And what happens oftentimes when we're going through things is we go through things through this sequence, right? And the sequence tells us that something happens, then I tell myself something, then I feel something, and I do something. And it happens in this triangular pattern. And at times, the way that we receive things might not always be helpful or truthful, therefore making us have actions that are not necessarily helpful or truthful as well. So I was given this very, very simple piece one day in therapy that said, here's how you check your thoughts, right? The only thoughts that matter on this quadrant, that we try to graduate to, are these helpful, truthful thoughts. But that doesn't change the fact that we have helpful, untruthful thoughts. We have untruthful, unhelpful thoughts. And we have unhelpful, truthful thoughts. And these are difficult things to figure out how to manage. And that's what I wanted to focus in on matching. One of the big things that I feel like I commonly have inside of our society is this habit of collapsing myself. And, it's funny, in education, we talk about this thing so commonly called whole child, where we want to make sure that we're teaching all of the teaching, supporting, and boosting and lifting all aspects of a student. But it's really interesting. What I see with adults is we're not celebrating our whole selves commonly. And to me, this is really where we have one of the most difficulties with this cognitive dissonance model, right? Where we present unhelpful, untruthful things. And that's going to be our first focus on a quadrant: unhelpful, untruthful things. And this comes to me by way of, man, how many of y'all have ever been having a day and somebody rolls up to you and asks you, how are you doing? And your first thought in response to them is good, even though you're not good. You are actually at times nowhere near good, and sometimes you are actually excellent. And you still struggle to give the real depiction of what you are experiencing. So, um, I think that this is one of the first graduation steps that we can sort of have for ourselves here, inside of this society that is still working, constantly. And we're having to have advocates, just like This Is My Brave, to sort of graduate the society to be able to check in on people. And one organization I work with, we ask people to give an actual numerical value to how they're doing so we can have them actually really thinking about, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 5, 10 being the best, where are you actually at in your day? So at least we get even a more authentic result. But here's the deal: we're working about on poetry today, and I don't have to talk through this. I can actually present you with an artist who does this fantastic. So that's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring you in connection with one of my favorite artists in the entire world. Their name is Rudy Francisco. Rudy Francisco is one of the most recognizable names in spoken word poetry. He was born and raised and still resides in San Diego, California. At the age of 21, Rudy completed his BA in psychology and decided to continue his education by pursuing an MA in organizational studies. As an artist, Rudy Francisco is an amalgamation of social critique, introspection, honesty, and humor. He uses personal narratives to discuss politics, race, class, gender, and religion while simultaneously pinpointing and reinforcing the interconnected nature of the human experience. That is Rudy's bio by way of his website, iamrudyfrancisco.com. So without me holding you up any longer, I am going to matriculate a screen share here for you to be able to watch this poem that I want you to see. For your own self. I believe it has two titles that I've seen it go by. One title is called Tuesday, and one title is called When People Ask How I'm Doing. So give me just 1 second to pull this together for you, and we'll go from there. I will say, for transparency, I'm going to mute myself because I believe that enhances the sound. So here goes me muting myself. Sounds like we're working through some technical difficulties here. I'm hearing that y'all could not hear him. And let's fix this. So let's run it again. All right, bear with us, y'all. We are having some unexpected technical difficulties, and as has happened with this digital age, so we're going to try something else that may cause some echo, as we had before. But let's see if this works.
When people ask how I'm doing, I want to say my depression is an angry deity, a jealous God, a thirsty shadow that wrings my joy like a dish rag and makes juice out of my smile. I want to say getting out of bed has become a magic trick and I'm probably the worst magician I know. I want to say this sadness is the only clean shirt I have left and my washing machine has been broken for months. But I'd rather not ruin someone's day with my tragic honesty. So instead, I treat my face like a pumpkin. I pretend it's Halloween. I carve it into something acceptable. I laugh and say, I'm doing all right. Thank you.
All right, that was Rudy Francisco's When People Ask How I'm Doing. And I think you were able to hear that poem come through there. So let me unshare here. And I'll also make sure that in here I connect this link to you so that you yourself can view this poem yourself. So there's that link for you to have. And I'm sorry about those technical difficulties, but that's what we're kind of working our way through there. So we have an assignment for you. And the goal of this was to kind of give you sort of like a middle of the day nugget for you to kind of work with and write with. So here is the assignment. After Rudy Francisco's, I want you to write a When People Ask Me How I'm Doing poem. I want the poem to be a minimum of 14 lines with 3 stanzas that start with, I want to say. And one thing I say, I try to create numerical expectations. That's why I have lines and stanzas, because sometimes it's nice to kind of challenge ourselves to stretch a little bit. And what I always say is a lot of times, once you feel like you're done, you've only just begun. And also, I like to think about the fact that you can always keep breathing life and expanding your writing. So, 3 stanzas, 14 lines gives you a lot to work with. But if you feel like you got more, go ahead and pour. That's what I always say. You got more, you just go ahead and pour. You let that come out. Okay? So I also have what I call O&Is. And O&Is to me stand for observe and possibly inherit. So there's things that Rudy does fantastic as a poet that I think are worthy of our attempt. The first piece is to check out the repetitive use of elongated metaphor. So this is a really telltale skill of Rudy Francisco, and I have his poem up on one of my other screens, so I want to share with you that metaphor and simileic language are a big power of Rudy's, right? He does this through the whole poem. He says, my depression is an angry deity. Is depression actually an angry deity? I don't know, but the metaphor says so. It's a jealous God. Is it actually? I don't know, but the metaphor said so. It's a thirsty shadow that wrings my joy like a dish rag and makes juice out of my smile, right? So Rudy is always stretching and elongating the metaphor, stacking the metaphor, stacking the simileic language to give you a greater picture of this feeling that he has. And I think it's really important for us when we creatively write to try to convey that experience for us by using the powers of like, by using the powers of as to help us compare to create these wonderful pieces. Observe and possibly hear at point number 2, right? Using your inner voice as an extension of yourself, right? So oftentimes, if you think about life, like how many of us have a running clock of what's going on inside of our head versus what we're actually saying with our mouth or doing with our actions. So a lot of times, like I think what's happening with Rudy is he's having all these I want to says, I want to says, I want to says, and I pretend. So there's this inner voice thing that is happening while the conversation with whoever it asked Rudy who is what he's actually feeling is going on inside of his head. And I want you to think about this poem for a second. That he really just says, I laugh and say, I'm doing all right. But inside of that one, 3-word phrase, all of these other words were going on. And when I was telling you that this brain runs at 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts a day, that's how fast things can happen inside that one space. And that's the beauty that writing can give you the space to try to explore there. The third O and I is incorporating dialogue. And I even have here in the fine print, maybe even include a real conversation that was had or happens. So I want you to consider that this could actually be a real moment in your life where something was happening for you with a certain person or something that happens to you commonly, and then try to come into those moments. So again, best of luck on that poem. I want to give you that space and time to create. We're going to come back together next week and focus in on a whole nother poem and a whole nother probably writing style that we're going to work with. What we were hoping with myself and This Is My Brave team is that you could spend your time here curating and creating and making magic on your notepad and then share it out somewhere via social media, even though we know that's difficult. But that's the whole model of This Is My Brave, right? Is we're trying to destigmatize by making sure that we put our voice into the space and normalize the health of normalize the experience of mental health. And what better time to do that than in National Mental Health Poetry Month all together with us here. So if you want to share with us, we would love to hear your, when people ask me how I'm doing poem or read it, at hashtag Brave Days. And hashtag This Is My Brave Poetry. So again, I will see you back here next Tuesday at noon. I want to wish you the absolute best of luck with your week and really think about when people ask you how you're doing, what you really want to say. Be well, and thank you so much for your time today.